As part of French New Wave Month, on today's episode of Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez, my film review is The 400 Blows, followed by my segment Allow Me to Explain, and it all starts right now. This is Jordan Ramirez, and you are listening to Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez. And now, here is my latest film review. My film review for this episode is The 400 Blows, released in 1959, directed by François Truffaut, starring Jean-Pierre Léaud. Here is the synopsis of the film. Antoine Doniel, played by Jean-Pierre Léaud, is a troublemaker, causing trouble for his parents, his teacher, and even for his other classmates. Every time Antoine does something to cut corners, he would end up getting punished, and he ends up making things worse for himself. He disobeys and lies to his own parents, played by Claire Molière and Albert Remy, and his teacher, played by Guy de Combel. The only person whom he wants to be with is René, played by Patrick Othé, so that they can continue to cause mayhem in the city. What do I think of this film? While I understand this film is regarded as the film that started the French New Wave movement, I, for one, would say that this was my least favorite of the movement. The film is meant to be a character study about Antoine Doniel. For me, I felt that the film's main protagonist is deeply unsympathetic for me to trust. Antoine, to me, is nothing but a spoiled, rotten brat who, as I have mentioned before, is a troublemaker. There are moments in the film that I feel make me go against the film's main protagonist. Antoine, for example, is a compulsive liar. He lies to his mother and father when it comes to stealing the Michelin guide that his father uses, his homework assignment, going to school, and even promising to get a good grade for his French essay. He also lied to his teacher when it comes to an excuse as to why he didn't do his own homework by telling his own teacher that his mother died even though she is alive. Number 2, he is a cheater. When he is working on his essay for French grammar class, he ends up copying verbatim, word for word from Balzac and his essay to make it seem like as if it is original. 3. He is a troublemaker. He skips class and doesn't even leave a note for his teacher to complete his homework assignment by playing at a carnival attraction and playing pinball, only to catch the attention from one of his own classmates. When he stays at René's house, he shoots spitwads from the Michelin guidebook that Antoine stole from his own father, runs at the church, smokes a cigar, drinks liquor, and plays backgammon with his own friend. Number 4, he is a thief. He steals his father's typewriter so that they can hawk more items from the rooftop, and when they were supposed to get more money, Antoine ends up trying to take it back from the thief and is caught and now is put to an observation center. And number 5, he is a runaway. He is now sent to the observation center, which is basically a juvenile delinquency center. He was sent there to be straightened out and he ends up escaping. I know that during this period, almost all of the protagonists of this period, including Jean-Pierre Léaud's character in this film, are anti-heroes. But I think of his character as nothing more than a rotten, spoiled brat. To be honest, I feel that even though the adults in the film are meant to be unfavorable and portrayed as harsh and authoritarian and unsympathetic, I for one find it problematic. Sure, his parents in the film are portrayed as unloving and completely unaware of what their own son has been doing, but for me, I find that no matter what his parents are trying to do, they are doing everything they can to love him and to make sure that he is educated and knows how to handle the whole world on his own, like his own mother, who was once rebellious in her childhood and knew what it was like. The teacher, on the other hand, he is meant to be garish and grotesque stereotype. I sympathize with educators because I know that if one were to be harsh on teachers, you don't know how hard it is for them to educate and teach young children about what it's like to look at the outside world. Sure, some of the subjects may not be favorable in the outside world when looking for a job, but teachers are meant to be a guide for those who need to teach what it means to live in the outside world from outside your classroom and your everyday life. In my opinion, as I was watching this film, even though I do sympathize with young people in today's culture and today's climate, I feel that the adults in the film were not as great in the film as they were depicted, but they were meant to be harsh and authoritarian. But yeah, if my opinion seems unfavorable, that's fine. But I learned that outside of this film, that even though adults are meant to be harsh and cruel through movies, I also feel that there are good adults out there who want children to know that even if life seems unfair and you want things to be done your own way, there will be other forces that will make things a lot harder for you that you never expected before, that you will need to understand once you are in this outside world. While the French New Wave movement is meant to be experimental in terms of narrative and technological aspects, this film to me felt more simplistic and not experimental. It felt more like a mainstream Hollywood film that could have been made yesterday. So I felt more sympathetic and comfortable with the other works by Jean-Luc Godard, Agnès Varda, and Jacques Demy for now. Even though I have watched Truffaut's first film, I am not sure about watching his other films, but I'll give it a try. Truffaut's first film is derived from his own life story that he wanted to put on the screen, so the film is meant to be the director's own autobiography about his early life as a child. Truffaut wanted to present a film that addresses the grittiness of adolescence in his directorial debut. "I wanted to express this feeling that adolescence is a bad moment to get through," said Truffaut in an interview. The film was shot in less than 2 months, using exterior and interior locations that was shot for less than $50,000. One of the crew members who worked on this film was Henri Decay, the cinematographer with a vast experience who was able to use natural lighting and was able to flow freely with his camera of using tracking shots that are so, uninterrupted. The screenplay was written by Francois Truffaut and Marcel Moussy. The editing for the film was done by Marie-Joseph Yoyot. The music was composed by Jean Constantine. The film premiered at the Cannes Film Festival on May 4th, 1959. It later premiered nationwide in France on June 3rd that same year. The film was shown in the United States on November 16th of 1959. The film was nominated for several accolades and awards, including winning Best Director at the Cannes Film Festival, the Critics Award at the 1959 New York Film Critics Circle, and the Best European Film Award at the 1960 Bodil Awards. The film received the nomination for Best Original Screenplay at the 1960 Academy Awards. It was ranked number 39 in the poll for Sight and Sound magazine of the greatest films ever made in 2012, and also 13th on the director's poll on the same list. My closing statement is purely simple. I may not be a fan of this film, and it is my least favorite of the French New Wave movement. To me, it is overrated because I understand that other filmmakers would put this film on their favorite films list, as well as other members of the film community would try to connect to this film because of its situations and its characters and what they experience in the outside world. Well, for me, I am a contrarian who would disagree from the larger crowd. I am not saying this out of spite. I am saying this because I just didn't like the main character of the story. That's all. That is my own personal opinion of this film, and I hope you agree with me on that statement, or maybe not. We will be right back with Allow Me to Explain. The midterms are already over, and while most of the media coverage focused on the midterms, the one news story that has gotten not a lot of coverage or discussion is the Supreme Court case that involves Medicaid and how the case could be detrimental not only to those who have received Medicaid benefits, but also to people with disabilities and the vulnerabilities that they face. It's time for Allow Me to Explain. On November 8th, the same day as the midterm elections, the Supreme Court heard oral arguments in the case known as Health and Hospital Corporation of Marin County versus Talevski. According to the website kff.org, the case raises the issue of whether Medicaid beneficiaries can seek relief in federal court when they believe their rights are being violated by state officials, or whether enforcement of state compliance with federal Medicaid rules should be left solely to the Federal Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, or CMS. The case could also have implications for other federal programs beyond Medicaid, where states play a role in administering or implementing them. To understand how we got to this important case before the Supreme Court, we have to look back at the origin of this case. The case began with the individual in the case, Gorgi Talevski, who suffered from dementia. His family filed a lawsuit against the Health and Hospital Corporation of Marin County in Indiana, also known as HHC, alleging that the nursing facility prescribed Gorgi with psychotropic drugs, also known as chemical restraints, involuntary transfers, sexually and aggressively harmful to Gorgi, and an attempted involuntary discharge to a dementia facility that violated the Federal Nursing Home Reform Act, or FNHRA. FNHRA established the minimum standards of care to which nursing home facilities must follow to participate in the Medicaid program. Gorgi Talevsky's family sued by using a federal law known as Section 1983, which parties have used for decades to enforce certain federal rights. Talevsky's family argued that FNHRA's rights against chemical restraint and involuntary discharge and transfer are enforceable under Section 1983, and that an adverse ruling would be disastrous for federal safety net programs, end quote. The U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Indiana dismissed the case, ruling that Medicaid enrollees cannot enforce the FNHRA. Talevsky appealed to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit. In the appeal, Talevsky claimed HHC violated her husband's right to be free from chemical restraints and his rights related to resident transfer and discharge procedures. The Seventh Circuit reversed the district court's opinion and remanded the case, holding the FNHRA unambiguously confers individually enforceable rights on nursing home residents such as Gorgi Talevsky, and those rights are presumptively enforceable under Section 1983. The date for this was June 27th of last year. On August 25th, 2021, the Seventh Circuit Court denied a petition for panel and an en-banc rehearing. On November 23rd of that same year, the Health and Hospital Corporation of Marin County, the petitioners, appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. On May 2nd of this year, the U.S. Supreme Court agreed to hear this case. So, who is arguing for the case and who is arguing against it? In support of HHC for this case are the National Conference of State Legislatures and the American Healthcare Association, while the ones who are in support of the Talevsky family are Public Citizen, the Constitutional Accountability Center, and AARP. Arguing for the petitioner of the case, HHC of Marin County, is Lawrence S. Robbins, and Thomas M. Fisher for the state of Indiana. Arguing for the respondent, Gorgi Talevsky's family, is Andrew T. Tutt. So, why is this case so important, and what are the implications it can do nationally? Jane Perkins, an attorney at the National Health Law Program, said, quote, "The reach of an adverse decision would be catastrophic. It would leave those programs really standing out there without a true enforcement mechanism. The answer to the question of whether people who depend on federal assistance programs can sue if their rights are violated has been settled precedent for decades," end quote. Perkins also had concerns about what the court would do after the Dobbs decision. The idea that the court would accept this case and accept that question of whether you can enforce these laws is of concern. The recent court decisions, Dobbs in the abortion context coming to mind, shows the court is willing to set aside precedent, end quote. It isn't just Jane Perkins who has concerns about this case. Disability rights advocates have also had strong pushback on the case that would severely restrict not just Medicaid, but also other government programs that have been reliant. The advocate stated that the implications could be far-reaching, affecting millions of beneficiaries of programs, ranging from Medicaid to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, also known as SNAP, the Children's Health Insurance Program, also known as CHIP, the Temporary Assistance to Needy's Family, etc. Shira Wakschlag, I don't know if I pronounced the last name right, Senior Director of Legal Advocacy and General Counsel at the ARC of the United States, said, quote, "An expansive ruling could prohibit individuals from seeking relief for violations of key civil rights statutes that prohibit discrimination in a wide variety of public programs. It's the single greatest threat to the decades-long fight for healthcare access, community integration, and civil rights for people with disabilities," end quote. The amicus briefs that were in support of the Talevsky family at the end of September were filed by the National Health Law Program, also known as NHELP, other advocacy organizations, professors and scholars, populations groups such as AARP, American Cancer Society, and Bazelon Center, provider groups like public hospitals and community health centers, and federal officials, former HHS officials, and former/current members of Congress. The points that are discussed in these briefs include: the case could overturn over 5 decades of judicial precedent and undermine congressional intent that individuals are able to use federal courts to enforce rights under federal programs. If enforcement is left to HHS, millions of Americans could be at risk because federal enforcement is not adequate due to limited capacity and funding. A decision to limit the ability to sue in federal court could deprive millions of Medicaid enrollees access to care, including children who are entitled to comprehensive coverage under EPSDT benefit and those with chronic conditions, serious life-threatening diseases, and people with disabilities. The court's decision could affect the rights of millions of low-income Americans who rely on other spending clause programs, not just Medicaid. What is the next step for this Supreme Court case? According to NPR, when the Health and Hospital Corporation Board of Trustees in Indiana had a meeting in mid-October, the case was absent from the agenda. But when it came for public comments in the meeting that opened, state representatives, patients, and advocates made their demand for the agency withdraw its Supreme Court petition. Their demands, however, were ignored and no action was taken to remove the petition from the Supreme Court by HHC. When the arguments were presented before the Supreme Court, it appeared that the court was unlikely to gut the Medicaid program since only 3 justices appeared in favor of the argument, but only 6 were not in favor of it. While one may breathe a sigh of relief after the justices seem reluctant to go after the Medicaid program, it may go another way. Who knows? Some of the key lines from the court argument on November 8th were delivered from Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson and Amy Coney Barrett. Justice Jackson: "It is odd to suggest that we, as a court, can reinterpret the word law in Section 1983 to carve anything out." Justice Barrett: "I could not see the connecting of the dots in the argument to disallow the suit." Sarah Rosenbaum, a health law professor at George Washington University, said, quote, "My chief takeaway was skepticism at every turn regarding the state's argument about nursing home rights, and much more fundamentally, a seemingly unwillingness to engage on the state's most explosive claim, which was that Medicaid just cannot be enforced through 1983. My point is very simple. As a disabled Latino, Latinx American, I feel that it is my right to provide my own perspective on this suit. I am a member of the disability community who relies on Medicaid, but I do not want the program that I have relied on to make me feel left out or gutted. Since if the case were ruled in favor of HCC, I would be vulnerable to losing this program for my protection when it comes to my rights. And this story is not just an afterthought that can be overshadowed by the big news, but I also believe that the underrepresented disability community should have their fair share of getting their own story told to the public, and why this story should have received more coverage. This has been Allow Me to Explain. The information for the film review segment of The 400 Blows came courtesy of imdb.com and tcm.com for the information for the review and also for the background and production information. The information for the Allow Me to Explain segment on the case of HHC versus Talevsky's court case for the Supreme Court came courtesy of Vox.com, KFF.org, as well as from NPR.org, Disability News Scoop, and other resources for informational purposes that is needed for this program. And I hope you enjoy listening to that segment, and make sure before I tune out of this show to let your friends and family know about this case, and also to share your own experiences, or maybe someone you know who has an experience with being under Medicaid or any other programs from the federal government, to make sure that your voice can be heard too, and not just for me, but for everyone else who has been affected by this case that is ongoing at the moment. And we won't be able to get a ruling on this until June of next year. So if you have any information, just put it on your social media feeds such as LinkedIn, Instagram, or Facebook. I would avoid using Twitter too much because it's getting a little bit hectic lately. But as I said, just make sure that you get your information out there and tell your own story about your experiences and what this court case could do for you if these programs were gutted. So that's just an explanation, and I will get back to you in just a few moments. You have been listening to Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez. This series is now available to listen to at 4 p.m. on Anchor, Spotify, and Google Podcasts every Friday. Make sure to go to my blog website at filmtalkwithjordanramirezpodcast.wordpress.com with my latest podcast episode on the page labeled episodes, as well as catching my latest blog. You can contact me on my social media feeds such as LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. I am also available on Letterboxd. If there is a film that you recommend that I would put for my next review, make sure to submit it to my social media accounts. And until then, I'll see you at the movies.